1 week season.
Hey, and welcome in, OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We are back in the DFS lab, and as always, it is Monday, so that means we're looking at Showdown for tonight. The show is presented as always by 1 week season, and purpose of this show: build a lineup on DraftKings and use that as a vehicle to talk through the game tonight. We got Texans at the Cowboys tonight, with the Texans, despite being on the road, big favorites. And we're recording this Monday morning, coming to you at around 9 a.m. Eastern. And I'm your host, Cheeseman, and it's my pleasure, as always, to welcome up Xandamere. Xandamere, how was Week 11 for you?
Hey, good morning. Week 11 was frustrating because normally I feel like we're pretty good at identifying the core places to target, the core games and teams. And then the hard part is mixing and matching the pieces around them, sort of the one-off pieces, right?
Yeah.
This week I got, the one-off pieces all right. It was the core game stacks that failed, right? So we went, I say we, and I can't speak for all of OWS here, right? But I think broadly speaking, OWS was really high on Seattle, San Francisco, and Pittsburgh, Baltimore. Pittsburgh, Baltimore, especially because it was projecting for shockingly low ownership for, it was the highest game total of the week. Those two games were tied as the highest game totals of the week. Felt like very attractive places to attack. Baltimore had scored 20 points on every single opponent they faced this year, had given up the most passing yards in the league by a wide margin, but was really good against the run. So great pass funnel defense to attack. Everything lined up there. Then those two games are the highest Vegas total games of the week. They ended up being the lowest and third lowest scoring games of the week when all was said and done. And so, football gonna football, right? The game is played by humans on the field, and all the projections and all the Vegas totals and all that, there's a reason they play the game on the field. You don't just get paid out for making the sharpest lineup, ahead of the contest, right? They actually have to play the game. And it's funny, we were texting, we had this group text with me and Hilo and Mike and JM, and we were texting before the game started, saying we all said that we felt probably the best we'd felt before a slate. However it turns out, we felt the best we felt before a slate.
I felt that way too. Yeah, I felt really good actually before the game started.
Yeah, and so I said something like, "So of course we're all going to lose," and of course that's how it turns out. But the thing is all we can do as DFS players is make good decisions. We cannot control the outcomes on the field. We cannot know the outcomes on the field, right? All we can do is say, with the information we have, which is price, we have historical data, we have analysis of team tendencies, matchups, we have ownership projections. All we can do is take all that information and make the best possible decisions that we can, and then cross our fingers and hope the outcomes turn out the way we want, right? And so when all of us were saying we felt good, we weren't saying that we're clearly going to win, right? What we were saying was, regardless of how this actually turns out, we feel we've made good decisions, and we'd like to win. I'd sure like to win, but I can't control that. What I can control is making good decisions, and I feel that I made really good decisions this week. Didn't get paid off for it. The Lions. How about the Lions? Right? They're a good offense. They've been a good offense all year. They've also not generated much in the way of tournament-worthy scores the entire season, because they're spread out. They're a low passing volume offense. They tend to curb stomp their opponents and then sit their starters in the fourth quarter, and that's exactly what they did. By the fourth quarter, they benched all their starters. But the problem if you didn't play the Lions, is in those 3 quarters, they scored 7 consecutive touchdowns, did not punt, did not kick a field goal, 7 drives, 7 touchdowns. That is the third time in NFL history that has happened. So they tied the record for consecutive touchdown drives, tied with the Patriots and Bills from, I don't know, years ago, 2009, 2007. Actually, I'm sorry, Patriots versus the Bills, one of them. Patriots did it twice. So they tied the record set by one of the best offenses of all time, the mid-aughts Patriots. With peak Tom Brady. What are you gonna do, right? What are you going to do?
And Jared Goff passed almost a season high. Actually, no, I can't say that. He did have the one game with 55, but man, I just through 3 quarters, he hit the over on his prop and that kind of stuff. I'm just come on,
we
had why are you throwing so much with Jared Goff when you're already up by 30?
We had an under in the props market in Jared Goff because he's averaging something like 24 pass attempts per game, and we didn't think Jacksonville put up a fight, and they didn't.
And they
but
didn't.
Again, the problem is the Lions were so efficient, and Jacksonville, the Lions were so efficient that they were able to rack up, for them, Jared Goff only attempted 29 passes. That's not a lot of passing volume, right? If I told you that Jared Goff was going to attempt 29 passes, you probably wouldn't be very interested in playing Lions pass catchers. But, Amon-Ra St. Brown got 11 targets, 40% target share, and caught every single one, right? So again, just absolutely ridiculous efficiency. And they're a good offense, and it was a good matchup. They're capable of that. Watching Jared Goff complete his final pass of the game to hit the over on his prop and then be benched after that was very frustrating outcome.
Oh, man, just like the tilt, dude. Just that's a bad beat right there.
Yeah, but again, we can't control outcomes, right? And you have to kind of make your peace with that. It's frustrating when it happens in the moment, but if you want to be successful in this space, whether you're talking DFS or props, you have to make your peace with the fact that you cannot control the outcome. And sometimes they're going to run your way. Sometimes they're not. We tend to remember when they don't because it's very, very frustrating. But we tend not to remember all the little breaks that went our way that could not have gone our way.
That's true.
When we do well, we don't remember. We don't think of the play where for example, 2 weeks ago last week, Bijan Robinson scored a touchdown after Tyler Algier had 3 consecutive goal line carries from the 1 yard line and didn't get in. What are the odds of that? The odds of that are very, very low that Tyler Algier will not get in.
A few weeks ago, Cedric Tillman having a 40-yard touchdown reception on a 4th and whatever that pushed the Browns' whole passing attack into tournament worthy scores.
Yeah.
And that was a 4th and something against the Ravens. If he doesn't catch that, then those scores are much less valuable.
Yeah, those little breaks that go your way, you don't tend to remember those, or you don't tend to think of them as that's luck flipping my way. We tend to remember, this, I can't believe this happened. It was so terrible. Oh my God, it was awful. Such a bad beat. And maybe it is, but we tend to have a selective memory about that stuff. And you just have to make your peace with that, because you're going to get some things going your way. You're going to have things that don't. Overall, you're going to have more things that don't because there are more things that can not go your way because you're only playing a lineup of a certain number of players. There's a lot more players in the NFL, right? Yeah. There's more things that can hurt you than help you. So it's just the nature of the beast, and we have to make our peace with that, or you're going to drive yourself crazy playing this game.
Yeah, exactly. I had a frustrating day too. I was down 50%. Earlier in the day, I was looking hey man, this could be a big day. And then the Lions, scored their 6th and 7th touchdowns. It's okay, I don't have any Lions, but I was happy with a thing that I did that I'm just, trying to improve as we continue on, just get better every week. But something you guys mentioned on the slate and something I've been reluctant to do in the past, but in the past, it's Cedric Tillman, he looked like the best play on paper. So I'm just going to ignore Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore, just play Cedric Tillman mainly with Jameis. But you and Hyla were talking on the slant. It's Judy's going to be 1/5, 1/6 the ownership of Cedric Tillman. And there's certainly a chance that he's the one who catches a long touchdown or whatever. And so I put in more of those kind of ancillary pieces with the Browns passing attack because I had quite a bit of Browns. And Jeudy ended up being a great piece that, probably cashed more lineups than I would have otherwise because I had played more of him. So I'm okay, I need to get comfortable with putting these other guys in, even though it seems less likely that they'll hit. It happens quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, so Jeudy was actually in the optimal lineup.
Yes.
He was the second highest scoring wide receiver of the week behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. So there's a player by the name of Utica, who I think everyone knows who that guy is on DraftKings, one of the best DFS players in the world. And he's this really sharp guy. And he did an interview. He's done a couple of interviews that are really, really good watching. And he said something like one of the things he credits to his success is that he's not afraid to not play the best plays. And so to be clear, Cedric Tillman on paper was the best play of the Browns pass catching core. I'm not claiming he wasn't, right? His target volume was awesome. He was clearly the wide receiver one in that offense, but the field through its ownership was expressing a unreasonable level of confidence that he was in fact going to be the guy this particular week. And if you looked at Jerry Jeudy's underlying metrics, his target volume, ADOT, all that jazz, he was not that far behind Tillman. He was behind Tillman. Tillman was the best guy, but Jeudy was not that far behind. And so the odds of Tillman outscoring Jeudy were probably something like 55-45, maybe 60-40 at best. But we as humans tend to overrate the odds of the likeliest outcome occurring, which is why we're always shocked when underdogs win. When the underdog outcome happens, we're always like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. It's like, it happens all the freaking time. So if Judy was a 40% if Judy had 40% odds to beat Tillman's score, well, why was Judy 1/5 the ownership of Tillman? It's because the field overrates the likeliest outcome. And you don't always have to do that play. Because here's the if you always take the lower owned guy, then at some point you need to have the higher likelihood of hitting too, right? And so that's the balancing act of where do you balance playing the guys who are a higher likelihood of having a good game versus the guys who are lower owned. And that's the art of DFS, right? In this case, the reason that you don't always just want to play the lower owned guy, right? But what attracted us to Judy was the fact that there was so much ownership on the other pieces of the Browns offense, right? We were projecting near 40% ownership for Elijah Moore and Cedric Tillman and like 5% for Judy. And so when almost half the rosters in a tournament are going to project to own a piece of the Browns offense, that's where you want to say, oh, maybe I should consider this other lower owned guy. We were also on Nick Chubb, who didn't pan out, right? At low ownership. So they didn't all hit. Same thing with the Patriots, right? Like Keyshawn Boutte, I cannot not laugh at that name, was, I didn't actually see what he came in on DraftKings. We had him projected for like around 20%.
I didn't either, actually. I know I could go back and check, but I didn't either.
Yeah, around the industry, he was projected around 20% ownership because he was, one of the few plays that was really cheap, sub 4K that projected well. And, Hilo introduced the idea of playing Kendrick Bourne instead to our sort of group chat, and we talked about, looked through it. JM published it in his player grid, and we talked about it on the show, and about how Kendrick Bourne was kind of benched for one game but expected to come back. And then when we saw that they released Tyquan Thornton, they made KJ Osborne inactive. That was a signal. Those are signals that Kendrick Bourne was going to play a lot. And so we said, okay, look, these are the same play, right? They're both really cheap outside perimeter receivers in a matchup that favors outside perimeter receivers on a mediocre offense, to be clear. But they're super cheap. One guy is going to be 20% owned. One guy is going to be 1% owned, if that makes sense to play the 1% owned guy, right? It's like we've got that one right because it was so high scoring that Bourne didn't really matter. But that was another place, we talked about at tight end. Like we talked about getting the ancillary pieces right. We didn't talk a lot about Taysom, but Taysom is always viable with the Saints as low as hurt as they are. And we talked about I said Jonnu Smith was my favorite of the cheap tight ends, and he was optimal. Right, he was also in the optimal lineup. So, like I said, we got all the cheap, all the one-off plays right. We just missed the game stacks.
Yeah, man.
Unfortunately, but so be it. Right, it's how it's going to go. Sometimes it's just an odd outcome. It's not the normal outcome. But if you played, for example, Browns with Judy, like Jameis, you didn't need the Lions to win because the Lions were so low owned. That you did, and there were so many good scores in the slate, and there were also many other low owned scores. Like if you had Jameis with Tillman and Jonnu, or Jameis with Tillman and Taysom Hill, and then Achan, you were in pretty good shape. They weren't those weren't necessarily all the optimal plays, but you were in pretty good shape there.
Yeah, man. I did not play Taysom just as pain, dude, because I'd played him 2 straight weeks, and then for some reason he just slipped out of my mind, in terms of a play. Yeah. And then I'm like, dude, what? Like 2 long touchdown runs. Oh, it's just straight pain, man.
What's 100 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns? Insane.
On 7 carries. Yeah.
On 7 carries, right? 100 rushing yards on 7 carries.
God damn, dude.
I mean, it's not what you expect. That's not the kind of outcome you're expecting or projecting for Taysom. But
hey, it's the NFL, dude. Great stuff, man. All right, you ready to jump into Showdown?
Yeah. Unless you want to talk. Oh, actually, do you want to talk for a little bit, if it's okay? And we can cut this out of the show if you want later, or you can. But we had a conversation going on yesterday in Discord about how the DFS, a game of skill, and it kind of ties back to the conversation we had last week about how to evaluate results and process over results, and that whole conversation.
Yeah, great stuff.
Which I think is an interesting conversation to have. Because I think that people get hung up on this idea of, is it a game of skill? Is it not a game of skill? How do you tell, right? Like, how do you tell? And I think it's interesting to think about that. someone was saying like, I'm trying to think of how to put it. Like someone was saying, or help people were saying, like, it feels really frustrating because like I put on all this effort and I don't hit. And I was kind of saying like, it's important for everyone to understand what you're playing DFS for. If you're playing DFS for fun, for entertainment, it's a hobby, and you don't, and you want to be a good player, but like you don't really mind if you're losing a bit of money. You view it as spending money on a hobby. And it's nice if you win. You want to be good at the game, but like you expect that you're not going to win all the time. Then playing these large tournaments is totally viable, right? But I was kind of sharing some very basic math, saying, like, if you're entering even a 1,000-person tournament, let's say 1,000, so not a huge. That's what a lot of people will consider like small to medium field.
Yeah.
And so like I'm not targeting the Millie Maker. I'm only targeting this 1,000-person tournament. Let's say that you are 5 times as good as the average DFS player. 5 times. You're probably not. Right. I don't think any of us are 5 times as good as the average DFS player. Very, very few could be 5 times as good as the average player. Let's say it's a 3-entry tournament. So you have 3 entries in this 1,000-person tournament. You have 0.3% of the entries in the tournament. You're 5 times as good. I'm going to simplify the math here. So you have a 1.5% chance of winning in a given week. 18 regular weeks of the season, that is 27% chance of winning over the year. So roughly speaking, you can expect to take down this tournament once every 4 years.
Wow.
That's a lot.
So that's with doing the math with already factoring in that you're 5 times better than the average player. Because you said you're entering 0.3%, times that by 5, that's 1.5% chance. Yeah, dude, that's insane.
And so
that really is.
And so the point is, it's hard to win tournaments.
One every 4 years.
Yeah. And so if your goal is to win these fairly large tournaments, like even if you're playing really well, it just doesn't happen that often. And we need to have that understanding. We need to have realistic expectations. And if your goal is to win, 100x your entry fee or whatever, like or more, then you're playing these large field tournaments. Because that's where the giant ROI multiplier is. You can turn $5 into $500 or $1,000 or $10,000. You need to play large field stuff. But the odds of winning those tournaments are really low, even if you're really good, because there's just a lot of people in them. And so if your goal is instead to say, hey, I don't care as much about trying to hit the lotto and trying to win, to bank the big tournament. Like what I want to do in DFS is I want to have a fun hobby because I like football and I like playing DFS. I like the game of it. I want to make this a fun hobby, but my goal is to be consistently profitable year over year. Okay, well then your targets should change, right? Like I've made a lot of money playing in 100-person and smaller fields because your expected value can be realized more quickly there. And so the concept is you want to be a plus EV player. You want to be 2x as good, 3x as good as whatever as the field. You want to be a plus EV player. We talked about how you can use your tournament finishes to benchmark that, right? Like, are you placing more than 1% of your entries in the top 1% of tournaments? That's a way to benchmark how you're playing, and if you're a plus EV player. But you also need to, at some point, turn that expected value into real value, into actual dollars, because you can't eat expected value. You can't buy more entry fees with expected value, right? Like expected value is lovely. Expected value, it's like stock options working at a startup that isn't publicly traded yet. You might have all the stock options in the world, but you can't pay your rent with them. You can't pay your rent with expected value. And so at some point you need to convert that expected value into real value. You can do that in large field tournaments, but as I said, you can be 5 times as good as the field. You'll win once every 4 years. Yeah, it takes a long time to convert your expected value into real value. In smaller field stuff, the path of converting expected value into real value is faster and smoother. You won't. Yeah, if you're playing like 100-person tournament for $5 or $5 entry fee, first prize might be $50, and you might say, well, that's not really like life-changing money. Like that's not worth it. Fair. That's your decision to make. But you can chase one of two things. You can chase a large multiplier, like a large, $5 into 5,000, and that feels really good if you hit it, but it's really unlikely. Or you can chase $5 into 50, and it's not as much it's not as many actual dollars, but over time your ROI percentage will probably be higher chasing those $5 into 50 and doing that every single week and trying to win those tournaments. And I'm not saying like everyone should play small field stuff, right? Like, or even cash games. You can play cash games too. Like those are viable. I'm saying that everyone should know what they want to get out of DFS. Like you should know what your goals are. and you should play contests that align with those goals and align with your strengths as a player. Like, I'm not good at milli maker contests. I joked about this, and Sonic mentioned it because he heard the show last week where I mentioned with Hilo, I think, mentioning that he won the milli maker with Ryan Griffin at tight end, and I was like, that's a play I would never make. Like, I would never play that. And so I would never win the milli maker because it's not my kind of tournament. It's not my kind of tournament, and I don't play that style of play. I can't go off the board enough. And like, so I don't play the milli maker. It's not my thing. I play the tournaments that I'm good at, that align with my strengths as a player. And I play the tournaments that I think align with my goals as a DFS player. I play some MME stuff, but I mostly focus on smaller MME, like 10,000 or under, and then I play a lot of small field stuff. And when I say small field, I mean 100 or under. I don't mean 1,000. And again, that's just for me. That works for me. You don't have to copy me, but you should know what you should be intentional about what you're playing, and you should play tournaments that fit your strengths and fit your goals, and be thoughtful about just entering the tournament and why you're entering this tournament or these tournaments. Like, your contest selection matters a tremendous amount in terms of your long-term success as a DFS player, and so you should put some thought into what you're playing and why.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And just exactly being really intentional and understanding, like, what your goals are, and just even having realistic expectations, because I think, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but the impact of screenshots on DFS play, of seeing like the person who entered 150 and then ended up hitting first for 50K or something like that. Or sometimes people will go on like a hot streak, and you'll see like, oh man, this person just like won 3 tournaments in like 10 days, or they're cashing top 10 in like, just kind of an insane run. And you're like, man, what am I doing that is not like, what are they doing? That kind of thing. And so you can get in this mindset of like, if I like do this or that well enough, I should be hitting at this insane rate. And like, people don't like talking about their losses, but people are happy to share their wins. And so you can get into this mindset of everyone's winning and I'm not, and it can be, that's one of the most frustrating parts of DFS, is having realistic expectations and truly understanding, like you said, like those kind of numbers, like once in every 4 years would be, like, by the math, a realistic outcome of taking down a tournament like that of 1,000 entries.
Yeah, it doesn't sound that big. And I mean, I can share, like, Osimo, who's one of the best DFS players of all time, has said that a good year for him is like a 7 or 8% ROI on his entry fees. Right?
And think how many entry fees he has.
And to be clear, that's on his entry fees, because someone said this in the chat, like, why don't you just put it in the stock market? Because the stock market is 10% per year on your money invested, but on your bankroll essentially. But you can cycle your bankroll multiple times by through entry fees. So like, you might have a $1 million bankroll or $2 million bankroll, which is obviously awesome.
But total entry fee cycle, that would be more. Yeah,
it's $10 million or $20 million in entry fees, right? So it's ROI on that. But like a 7% ROI, like, if it doesn't sound awesome to begin with, but then when you do the math, and it actually is, it's a living, it's a good living. But it's important to have those kind of expectations. And just about every big DFS player in the world, every successful DFS player in the world has had losing seasons. Like, I've had losing NFL seasons. I've had a couple of losing NFL seasons in my career. I'm a long-term successful player, for which I'm very grateful. But I've had a couple of losing seasons in my career because the variance is significant. It'll happen. And again, like, you need to have this expectation going into it. Like, and it's not as bad as it used to be. Like, remember the years when, like, FanDuel and DraftKings were throwing TV ads everywhere, and it was just like, everyone's like, I know fantasy football, I'm going to make all this money. And it's like, you're probably not, right? The data says something like 90% of players are unprofitable. We want to be in that 10%, but even if we're in that 10%, you might not be in that 10% in any given window of time.
Yes. So, it's a continuum for sure.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to, like, I feel like I'm telling people not to play DFS, right? Like, I'm not. Like, I think DFS is super fun. It's a wonderful hobby. It's fun. It's intellectually challenging. I think if most of us are football fans, it aligns with the sport we already like to watch. Like, it's a great hobby, but just have realistic expectations and put your effort towards where it's going to help you achieve the goals you want to achieve, right? Like, I talk about that a lot. Like, where do you put your effort? How do you make sure you're investing your time wisely? focus on the things you can control, that you can influence the outcome of. I don't know. I think it's important to have these kind of conversations, because if we don't, people are just firing off at the millimeter, or even the slant. We talk a lot about the slant as a good tournament in OWS, and it is. The payout structure is great, but it's still like over 10,000 entries most weeks. It's a big tournament,
and it's very sharp.
It's
the best players are playing it. So
yeah.
One of the I love the slant, but the last couple of weeks I've been just trying to look for different contests, and then looking at the results compared to things like the slant and the scoring, and there are softer tournaments out there than the slant.
Yeah.
Do you know what the payout structure may not quite be as good?
Yeah. Do you know what my overall highest ROI tournament bracket is?
What?
Contests between 5 and 10 players.
Okay.
And the reason why is that so many people enter those, and they just put their cash lineup in it. And so you can go in, and it's all the same. A lot of them are all the same players. A lot of those 5-10% contests, you're going to have 4 or 5 big names in who enter everything, and they're all going to have the same. A lot of them will have the same or very similar lineups, and they're using the same services. If you go run some optimals from major projection services, you can have a very good idea of what they're playing, and so you just play something different.
This is top secret information right here. This is this is the gold here. But no one would think this on their own. So this is
I've talked about Discord
good stuff.
But yeah, to imagine imagine a tournament of 5 people, and 4 of them have the same lineup, or very close to the same lineup, right?
Yeah,
and you just play something totally different. You're not going to win every week, of course, but let's say you win 30% of weeks or 40% of weeks, and you'd expect to win 20% of weeks in a 5% tournament if everything were equal. That ROI stacks up real quick.
It does.
In terms of percentage ROI, it's a really strong way but you don't have the big score. You don't win the big score, right? And turn your $5 into $5,000. But it's from a percentage standpoint, that's some of my strongest ROI is playing those kind of contests. So there's lots of different ways to be successful at DFS. And everyone should think about how they're approaching it and try to figure out the approach that, like I said, figure out the approach that makes sense for you.
Yeah, man. Most players don't really think this stuff through. They just start thinking, who's the best plays on Sunday, get a lineup in, hope for 50K, that's probably the highest percentage of what people are doing in terms of how much thought process they're putting into their play. So, yeah, man, great stuff as always. And this is definitely, this will definitely all go in the show. So no worries about that. All right, cool. Let's look at this showdown for tonight. Obviously, I'm glad we spent a little time on some other stuff, because the Cowboys are a disaster right now. So
oh God, yeah. How long can we talk about the Cowboys?
Right, yeah. But let me just get into a contest here, and so obviously Dallas is at home, but that doesn't stop them from being 7-point dogs. So we, I guess it looks like CeeDee Lamb will play. So. Yeah, man. Okay. Where do you want to start with this lineup and this game?
Yeah, so look, it's all in the game write-up. But I said this is all showdown and all DFS slates involve a lot of strategy, right? The game is more about strategy than it is about knowing good plays and knowing football. But some slates are more so like that than others. And on slates where we feel like we have a very high degree of confidence in the outcome of the game, then this slate becomes much more about strategy, right? And this is a slate where I feel like we're all expecting Dallas to get curb stomped, right? They're 7-point home underdogs. Cooper Rush is not good, right? The Cowboys weren't even that good with Dak, right? And now they look awful. Their defense has been atrocious. Everything seems to be lining up for for the Cowboys to just get crushed, right?
Yep.
But how often do underdogs win? Right.
Read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, that's actually I love Malcolm Gladwell. It's a wonderful book. Yeah. So, roughly speaking, we can expect a 7-point underdog to win about 30% of the time, right? So a little less than 1 in 3. Somewhere between 1 in 4, 1 in 3. That's a lot.
It is.
And so we should think about how we want to approach this game. Most people are going to be betting on the Texans to win. If you go just run, well, this is an exercise I like to do. If you go just run blind optimals, go run 100 lineups and don't change anything. on major projection sources and see what you get, right? I get near 100% ownership of Nico Collins, CJ Stroud, Joe Mixon. I get the next highest owned player, like then I get like these like the cheap Cowboys like Ezekiel Elliott and Jalen Brooks. I get something like 8% CeeDee Lamb. So like we're getting all this ownership focused on one side because of the total, because the perspective that the Texans are just going to romp. And so you can certainly build for that outcome. And I think my experience is that even in one-sided, even in high favorite games, you still don't see onslaught builds being owned as often as they should. And so let's really quickly just plug in, like, I'll show you what I mean by an onslaught build.
Yeah.
That's really quick. When I say onslaught build, what I mean is 5 of one team and 1 of another. And so there's, the simplest way to do this is let's go plug in like, sorry, I'm just browsing around the players really quick, but let's plug in like Joe Mixon to start with, because onslaught builds, generally speaking, have the running back as the most likely captain, right? Because they're the ones who continue racking up points late in the game when the team stops passing.
Right.
Let's plug in CJ Stroud and Nico Collins. They're the QB. QB is also like something like 70% likely to appear in an onslaught build. And Nico Collins is obviously the wide receiver 1, making his return from injury. Nico was said he was like ready to play last week. Apparently he was like fully healthy. They just decided to give him 1 extra week, like just in case. So like I expect he's going to step into a full role here and not be limited in any way. Then let's plug in the Texans defense, because we want, you're thinking if Dallas doesn't score at all, Texans D probably has a good game.
Oh wow, it's way up there.
Right. Yeah, they're expensive.
Yes.
And we can plug in like Fairbairn, the Texans kicker. And then we can plug in Kevontae Turpin, who's like this Dallas gadget guy who gets a shocking amount of usage near the red zone.
There we go.
And like that's an onslaught build, right? 5 Texans, 1 Cowboy. Commonly see, running back and quarterback are the 2 most common captains in successful onslaught builds, followed by wide receiver. So you can captain any of the 3 Texans we have in there, 3 primary guys. Defense appears in onslaught builds a lot. Like you want a lot of defense exposure in your onslaught builds, because you're basically saying the other team doesn't score enough to generate points. If they're not scoring at all, that generally means the defense is doing well. So this is a common sort of onslaught build, right? You can tweak it around. You can try to get up a little higher from like the total punt on Dallas's side. You can mix and match the captains. You could go from Fairbairn to someone like a Mechie or a Hutchinson or you can even play like a Damian Pierce, thinking that like later in the game maybe Pierce gets all the fourth quarter run. It's like there's a lot of ways you can build it, but like this is a common structure of an onslaught build, and this lineup will probably not be unique. I'm sure it won't be unique. It's pretty obvious. Any lineup I can build in 30 seconds is not going to be unique. It's my general rule of thumb. But onslaught builds are generally unowned relative to how often they hit, and so in heavy favorite games, like people are assuming the Texans are going to win, but you won't actually see all that many 5-1 Texans constructions. But let's go a different direction. Let's look at like what, and I just realized I had a build and I just deleted it because I was putting to the onslaught build. But like let's look at it differently for a minute.
Yeah.
What happens if Dallas wins? How does that play out? This is obviously not the likeliest scenario, right? But what if?
My brain is like exploding right now because I can't tabulate how it would even work.
Yeah, but what if they do? Again, roughly 30% odds of Dallas pulling off an upset here.
Seriously, man. Yeah.
And so, that's not nothing. That's a lot. So like this is not an outrageous, unreasonable outcome, is my point. Is it the likeliest outcome? Of course not. But there's no way this could happen. It would absolutely shock me outcome. It's not, or it shouldn't be, right? At the very least, it shouldn't be. So like, what does that look like? And there's a saying, like there's a data point of like 4-2 underdog builds are a classic leverage point in Showdown, where builds with 4 players in the underdog hit at a rate disproportionate to how they're played. It's hard to get to a 4-2 Cowboys build. And I've tried. It's hard. It's not impossible, right? But it's at least for me with the players I'm considering, it's harder to get to a 4-2 Cowboys build than it is to get to a 4-2 Texans build, even a 3-3 build, because I just don't like the Texans punt plays are really, really weak on what should be a low volume offense that's highly concentrated in a few players. But I think we can fairly easily make a 3-3 Texans build that I think is going to be unusual and not as owned as many other constructions in this game. And so what we're going to do, we're going to start with Rico Dowdle at captain.
Okay.
And what we're saying here is like the Texans passing offense is not likely to generate a ton of success. And it's hard to see scenarios where they really go off because Cooper Rush's ADOT is super low. He was like 2 yards per pass attempt last week. So could that happen? Of course it could. But I think that if the Cowboys win, the likeliest path for that is A, the game goes under its total. B,
yes,
it's more likely that the Cowboys win by the Texans offense not reaching its team total than by the Cowboys dramatically exceeding theirs. Like the Cowboys score 30 points here, that would really shock me. The Cowboys winning a 20-17 game that's the likeliest path. Doesn't mean that's the only way it can go, but I think it's the likeliest way that this game,
dude, with Brandon Aubrey hitting a couple 60-yarders, absolutely, that's definitely, could see that a lot more.
Mm-hmm. So, speaking of whom, let's put Brandon Aubrey in.
Yes, dude, that guy's got a leg.
Yeah, I mean, this guy is, my God, like he has hit a 60, 65, 57, 57. Like, I mean, good grief.
Like, yeah, dude, 260 plus 257s. Yeah, just wild.
Yeah, it's insane what this guy's been doing. But so we're thinking we're thinking a game that's lower scoring. We're thinking a game that is lower, probably fewer overall plays, where the Cowboys are able to establish and maintain a ground game that suppresses play volume. So Dowdle gets more touches. Hopefully gets into the end zone once, but like we're thinking a lot of low scoring field goals. So we're going to go Aubrey. Cowboys defense is a good fit in builds like this, but in the build that I'm working on right now, it doesn't fit. But I'm just going to say, I want a fair bit of Cowboys defense in these builds because, as I said, the likeliest path for this game for a Cowboys upset is Houston not getting near its team total. It's not likely the Cowboys win a shootout. It's likely that Houston scores like 14, 17 points, something like that. And so in that construction, I want to be overweight the field on Cowboys D, but they're not going to fit in this build. Because in this build, I'm going to put the next place I'm going to go the Houston side, and I'm going to go Nico Collins.
Okay.
I already talked about. I mean, he has proven himself a top 5 NFL wide receiver, I think. Should be fully healthy, should be a full role. People get fixated on Dallas being really vulnerable to rushing attacks because they've given some enormous rushing games, but they're actually last in the league in yards per pass attempt allowed. So they're just as bad against the pass.
Yeah.
And again, we're hoping they do better this week, right? But so the story we're telling here now is, well, actually, let me put more plays in, then we'll talk about the story. So we're going to put CJ Stroud.
Okay.
And this is where I think you don't have to go this route. This is where I would go. I would consider probably Stroud or Cowboys defense. I don't love playing quarterbacks against opposing defense. But this route, we're going Stroud and then Dalton Schultz. And so what we're doing here is we're telling a story of the Texans falling behind early and then elevated pass volume late as they attempt to catch up, right? And so we have 2 of their 3 primary pass catchers and their quarterback. So again, we're thinking that they find some passing game success. This is the game where we're hoping that the Cowboys score 20 points, the Texans score 2 touchdowns, they both come through the air as they're trying to catch up, right? And then last play we're going to plug in is Jake Ferguson, who I think has, of the Cowboys pass catchers, I think the strongest bets, and this isn't really that shocking, but are CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson. The reason why is that Cooper Rush is a quarterback who struggles to read through progressions. And so he's often going to lock onto his first read, which is generally going to be CeeDee Lamb, or he's going to be looking for an outlet, a safety valve, a dump off, and that's likely to be Jake Ferguson. And so they are the two Texans, sorry. They're the two Cowboys pass catchers in whom I have the most interest, because I think that they have the clearest paths to getting enough volume to find some semblance of floor and ceiling. Like guys like a Jalen Tolbert hitting some big plays.
Yeah.
I think possible, sure, anything's possible. I think those kind of guys, that profile is going to have a harder time being successful in this offense, given Cooper Rush's, how he does not spread the ball around effectively, does not go through progressions effectively, and how he does not throw the ball downfield. Right? It's hard to hit downfield when you don't throw the ball downfield.
Yeah, didn't you say Rush had like 2 yards of pass attempt last week or something like that? Very low.
Yeah, 2 yards. 2 yards of pass attempt last week, which is atrociously bad. And let's go look really quick at his career. He started some in 2022, the 2022 season. Let's see, the 2022 season, 162 pass attempts for 1,051 yards. So that's better, right? 6.5 yards per attempt. But that's still not good, right? That's not a good number. He's probably like a 5-6 yards per pass attempt guy, realistically, which is not great, but it does mean like he's not as abysmal as he looked last week, right? Or he hasn't been historically. So I think that betting on the Texans to make this competitive, I keep mixing them up. Betting on the Cowboys to make this game competitive, to win this game outright, I think is, from a strategy angle, like, is it the likeliest outcome? Am I trying to predict the Cowboys are going to upset the Texans? I am not, to be clear, right? Like, the likeliest outcome is the Texans win, about 70% odds, roughly, in fact. But from an ownership perspective, from a how do we build in ways that most people aren't perspective, it's pretty clear to me, as it often is in these significant spread games, that a sharp way to, it's not to be the only way you build, but a sharp way to build is to bet on the Texans either keeping the game close or outright upsetting. Oh my God, the Cowboys keeping the game close or outright upsetting the Texans. Also, I don't know if you're muted right now. I can't.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say Cowboys, Texans. They're both in Texas.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I have not spent much time in Texas, and it was in neither Houston nor Dallas when I was there. I've only been to Austin. I've only spent time in Austin, so I don't know. Apologies to any Texans out there for mixing the teams up. I'm sorry. The error is mine. I do in fact know the names of the teams. It's early in the morning for me. So
it is, dude. It's still we started this at before 6 a.m. for you, so that is true.
But anyway, a smart strategic angle for this game is betting that the Cowboys managed to upset the Texans. Look, I did it.
There it is. Yes.
And again, so the way I'm playing it, right? I'm playing roughly half my lineups based around the Cowboys upset, and then roughly half my lineups are going to be, only one Cowboy with, and that's betting on the onslaught. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm picking the two extremes. I'm playing for the two extreme outcomes and sort of avoiding the middle, which is a common showdown strategy for me. I look for the outliers instead of the middle outcomes.
Oh yeah, good way to go, man. Awesome, dude. Yeah. What were you to say? Something else?
It's funny because I realized, so last night I did something that I really never do, and in fact do not advise people to do, which is that I was so frustrated about how the day went. I normally don't play showdowns on Sunday night. That's normally kind of like I try to make that
chased your losses, Xandamere. You can't do that.
I did chase my losses, and I hit first place on both FanDuel and Yahoo. So
dude, nice.
The problem is I was just sort of building lineups fast, and I was like not really. I didn't put as much thought into it as I normally do. So it's sort of funny. I had this weird outcome where I got first on both those sites and I made some money, and that was great. But I played lineups that were actually negative EV lineups because they were so duplicated. And the reason I'm telling the story is that like sometimes in showdown play, our bad habits are rewarded. I played lineups that were, if I'd spent more time thinking about it, I would have realized that this is a lineup that's going to be massively duplicated. And I realized that it was not a smart lineup to play. But sometimes their bad habits get rewarded. And, and last night for me, they were. Again, you can play really chalky showdown lineups in small field stuff. That's fine. But I was playing in like the big tournament. And so, I won a little bit of money. But like when your lineup is duplicated,
you want for first place finish.
No. At the end of the day, it's like you tell someone, hey, would you rather win $1,000 or not win $1,000? Well, obviously win $1,000.
Yeah, take $1,000.
But again, this goes back to that we cannot predict outcomes, right? We cannot predict what's going to happen in the game. What we can know ahead of time is that in this tournament where the first prize was 50 grand or whatever it was, that sounds like a lot, but guess what? That's actually in this lineup that you've entered. That's not what you're playing for. You are in fact playing for like $1,000. And so with the field size, you know, if you take the field size and you take your entry fee, and again, you could say, well, my entry fee was $9 into 1,000. That's good. But the math of it is atrociously bad, right? What you're saying is the math of it is I'm entering my one lineup into this 50,000 entry contest. I'm just making up numbers, but like into this 50,000 entry contest. And my first prize winning is $1,000. That's a 100x roughly, but I'd 1 out of 50,000 to win the tournament. So that's a terrible, terrible expected value. And that's why I'm telling the story, is not to like pat myself on the back for winning. It's to say that I actually did a dumb thing. I got paid off for it, because sometimes that happens. Sometimes we get paid off for bad decisions. And we need to make sure that doesn't reinforce continuing to make those bad decisions because we got paid off the one time, is the point I'm trying to make. So, you know, don't chase your losses, guys. But if you do it with overly chalky, terrible lineups and hope for the best. No.
Yes.
You know, it's put thought into jobs. Differentiation is so key in Showdown, because duplication is a very, very significant threat in Showdown to our expected value. And if we enter high, if we cannot avoid really highly duplicated lineups, then you shouldn't be playing the large field stuff. It's fine to play those small field stuff, but like if you're playing large field stuff, you need to think about duplication and differentiation. Otherwise, you are just nuking your bankroll.
Yeah, I love it, man. Great stuff. And congrats. Either way, still congrats on winning first. But the point is well taken. And for the podcast, the lineup that we did finish on, the main lineup, was the 3-3 stack with Rico Dowdle as captain, Brandon Aubrey, Nico Collins, CJ Stroud, Dalton Schultz, and Jake Ferguson. Xandamere, great stuff, man, as always. And good luck for tonight if you choose to play Cowboys, Texans, and good luck to all of you guys. And we appreciate you, Xandamere, as always. Thanks for the time, man, on the DFS Lab.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, and good luck to you as well.